turned out to be kind of rough to deliver on. It was attractive during the summer at the height of many things, but that slogans don't really write budgets very well. And so I think a lot of people, and maybe some of the newbies on the city council, learned that before you sign on to something like that, go take a quick trip through the budget and see how much fun that's going to be to actually deliver on that.
Marcus, would you agree that the defund police slogan didn't serve the budget process well, or do you think it did?
I mean, I think it did in the sense that, look, at the end of the day, this is how change is made, right? It's like you have to reset the center, right? And you do that essentially by resetting the polarities. Was the budget defunded by 50%? Of course it wasn't, right? But it was defunded by around 15 to 20%, depending on, how you allocated it and account for that. Would that have happened without, this cry of defunding for 50%? I don't think so, right? I think if sort of the protests and demonstrations had only been relegated to, writing a strongly worded letter to your city council officials, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The fact is, we're continuing to have conversations around defunding the police. There are multiple cities who have continued to defund police, and reallocate that money either to communities of color and services or to COVID relief. That doesn't happen unless you have some level, right, of sloganeering. I mean, that doesn't just happen on the left, it also happens on the right? I mean, you had 1992, not to get too into it, where President Clinton ran, he didn't run on a balancing the budget, but in 1994, the Republican caucus said, no, we want a balanced budget. And by 1996, the budget was balanced. And that seemed to be a slogan that worked. So it does work by resetting the center at times. You're not going to get everything you want, but you are going to get some progress.
Brian, I want to hear from you. Before I do, I feel like I ought to play this week's well-known comment from the former President Obama, which Marcus just kind of thoroughly answered. But this is it's
important.
Let's listen to this, and I want to hear what you think.
If you believe, as I do, that we should be able to reform the criminal justice system so that it's not biased and treats everybody fairly, I guess you can use a snappy slogan like defund the police, but you've lost a big audience the minute you say it, which makes it a lot less likely that you're actually going to get the changes you want done. But if you instead say, let's reform the police department so that everybody's being treated fairly, divert young people from getting into crime. And if there's a homeless guy, maybe we send a mental health worker there instead of an armed unit that could end up resulting in a tragedy. Suddenly, a whole bunch of folks who might not otherwise listen to you are listening to you. So the key is deciding, do you want to actually get something done, or do you want to feel good among the people you already agree with? And if you want to get something done in a democracy, in a country as big and diverse as ours, then you've got to be able to meet people where they are and play a game of addition and not subtraction.
Former President Obama telling us that the defund the slogan isn't helpful. We heard Marcus address this. What's your take from a Seattle point of view, Brian?
Well, I think we've heard some echoes of this on the Seattle City Council. Councilmember Deborah Juarez just a couple of weeks ago was talking exactly about this, saying that defund the police was a hurtful slogan in some different ways. And she really looked at it as a way that it separated the council in a couple of different camps. And I think we really saw that division during the whole budget process here for Seattle as they went forward here. Now, I think Marcus is absolutely right, though, in terms of making some pressure on a very well-established situation, agency like the Seattle Police Department. You've got to put some pressure on, because that's an agency that's basically gotten a budget increase every year, right? So if you're not going to put some pressure on to really talk about the issues that are important, then you're not going to make that move. However, coming back to the middle here, I think that's also what Councilmember Juarez was talking about too, trying to figure out where that middle ground is. Because if you do defund the police over here and you do stop defunding over here, as the Police Officers Guild would say, then where is that middle? And I think it's tough for some people to find.
I think two things can be true at the same time here. You can have Obama and Representative Clyburn saying, that defunding, that language is off-putting. And then you can have the cool piece I read in the New York Times today, opinion section by Charles Blow. Actually, it was yesterday, and then it was carried in the Seattle Times today. But arguing that for exactly what you said, Marcus, that, that Obama and others shouldn't try to temper or cool down the activists, because that's how you produce change. And so that you're not going to get far being cautious. You're not going to get far re-implementing the same budget for the police department. And so I believe that both these things can be true at the same time. You can offend people, as Obama says, and lose people, and you can still have your activists saying this so they can pull the center.
Right. I just wonder where that middle ground does end up being, though, Joni. You know what I mean? When it turns into these different arguments between these different camps, what is it going to turn into? I mean, we saw cuts, as Marcus brought up, in between 15 and 20%, depending on where you look at the numbers there. And I just wonder where it settles out, because next year we're going to be still talking about police for sure.
I want to talk more about police, but Marcus, do you want to say anything more
Yeah,
about
please.
Finding the middle ground or defunding police?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just going to say, at the end of the day, we've had slogans before that have somewhat worked here in Seattle. We had the No New Youth Jail movement that people lobbied the same criticisms of, what are you talking about? No new youth jail. Do you just want children, or excuse me, do you just want juveniles and criminals to run, in an anarchy around the city? And it wasn't that at all. And yes, the jail, or the Children and Family Justice Center, ended up being, rebuilt and renovated and so forth. But the level of concessions that were given in terms of fewer cells, money given to community group organizations, and even Dow Constantine, the executive of King County, coming out this year saying that he wants to move towards zero youth detention. That would not have happened, right, without that constant sloganeering and that constant agitation. So I would be cautious of being cautious of agitating any farther.
Speaking of Seattle police, the police officers have rights that they've bargained with the city. For example, when it comes to disciplinary actions, officers have the right to a certain process. Brian, how do city leaders want to change that process briefly?
Yeah, it's tough to be brief on this one, Bill, but this is a super important point. We're talking about trying to figure out different ways that the city can work on its subpoena powers. They've been working on this over the past week here. What they're trying to do is strengthen those subpoena powers so that when they deal with SPOG, the Police Officers Guild, coming up here later on this month and into the future here, they're going to be able to compel more people to come forward as witnesses in these different cases of police misconduct. And that's the real general overarching piece here. But this is something that SPOG has lobbied against in many different cases. This is a situation that turned into a big sticking point back in 2018 when they had their last go around with this negotiation with their contract here. So I see the city really trying to take a little bit more power in the situation, and making this announcement this week, as the city has done. I think they're laying out, okay, here's where we're coming from, SPOG. Are you ready to go? Because this is going to happen in a couple of weeks in terms of that deadline for their contract.
Joni, what do you think is going to happen in these contract negotiations?
Well, hard to predict that exactly, but you have to be excited in a couple of ways here. First of all, you have the mayor and a council member, Lisa Herbold, working on something together.
Right.
If you looked at the way things were going last summer, which was really a low point in those relations, you'd have to say, yay. I mean, it's retro. It's what people always do, but yet it seems unique at this point. And then secondly, that this kind of authority is something that a lot of people want to see. They want to see progress on police accountability. And the city has been discussing this for a very long time. They've been, it had been recommended by a former judge, Ann Levinson, who was appointed to provide independent oversight of police accountability. And then it becomes law, and then it's weakened by some negotiations with the Guild. And this really restored something that was intended for years. And so you can see why it's back, and you can hope that you can pull it off.
Marcus, what's your take on Seattle Police Officers Guild 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I think from their vantage point, this is probably the worst time they could possibly choose to be negotiating, right? I mean, I think public sentiment, to Joni's point, is very much a consensus on the side of some level of reform. Now, we can debate about, what level that needs to take, but I do think that the general consensus is that there needs to be some level of reform. And so I don't see SPOG having much leverage in, combating that, right? I mean, I think there are going to be some level of concessions that are arrived at in this negotiation. And I would be surprised if there aren't, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and dovetail on that, Marcus. I think you're right on there. I think the other part of this that's really interesting is even if and when the city passes this legislation to try to increase the subpoena power or whatever else, this is still something that's going to have to go through the federal consent decree process, because we have a judge overseeing this, and Judge Robart, who's very interested in making sure this police accountability piece is met. He said in 2018 it wasn't being met. He actually said, nope, you're out of compliance here with this part of the consent decree. So I think there's concerns kind of now and in the future. And when it comes to SPOG and how they're dealing with the city or whatever else, also another good point in terms of that dealing, because as you know, the King County Labor Council basically disavowed SPOG a few months ago. So they're very much, I think, on their own in these negotiations. But I guess bottom line for me is no matter what the city does right now, and even if there's this deadline at the end of the year, SPOG has worked without a new contract for years at a time at some point. So we could be looking several months ahead for this to actually get some resolution.
Well, did any of you see that there's a new podcast?
Oh, yeah. Mike Solon's making that happen. Hold the line. Yeah.
Well, trying to get some word out there, is what it seems like. You realize this is going to be a highly charged time. They may not be the most popular group in town right now. And so they seem to be looking for an outlet to get their side of things out, which is a lot. There's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of folks sort of taking to the airwaves to send their own message and kind of control it.
We started off talking about the new city budget for 2021. The mayor, who I spoke to this week, Mayor Durkan, wanted to spend $100 million in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Marcus, what happened to that money? Again, this is another complicated one, but you can boil it down for listeners who are trying to follow what decisions got made.
Right, where the Reader's Digest version, right, is that Mayor Durkan, she originally proposed $100 million budget going into, $100 million fund that would be essentially targeting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities in Seattle to help parcel out that money. She was going to have a task force of a few, I want to say a little bit over of a dozen folks, community members who are fairly, well respected in the community to do that. There's obviously been there were some issues for a while about whether people should join that, whether they should not. It looks like that is going to commence. Unfortunately for the mayor, that $100 million is now closer to about 30 million after the city council's budget proposal, which that the mayor ended up signing on Tuesday there. The 70
listeners, why that is, Marcus? Why 100 million to 30 million?
Well, the city council, instead of putting that money in the hands of the task force, they wanted to put it in other hands, including 30 million of it into a participatory budgeting process where they're saying, community can. I don't want to say I don't want to get into the debate about who's authentic community and who's not, but their version of community can parcel out the money as it sees fit. I mean, it's in a participatory budgeting process. It should be known as something that New York City has been doing for quite some time. Yeah. I will say in terms of the back and forth and all that other stuff, I guess my main concern is making sure that this money does actually go to community and it actually is effective to BIPOC communities here. My worry is that if this money is allocated and it doesn't seem to be effective, or it's presented in some way where it's, hey, we threw this money at this community and it didn't seem to work, I think that will hamper the ability for any other sort of bold proposals in the future to BIPOC communities in the city. And we know good and well that they need as many resources as they possibly can get.
Yeah. Okay. Any other more thoughts on the keys to success or failure there?
I had a quick thought on that one, just with regard to those two pieces there. Marcus, I think you've identified it really well in terms of the different processes that are at work here. The mayor's got this $30 million bit going on. The council, I think, was very deliberate about it. They have a $30 million participatory budget process going on. So they're trying to keep those even. I'd really like to try to see them work together just so we don't have these competing interests or whatever else. I think that's a big piece of this too.
And I think in general, when you create these funds, the citizens are going to say, we want to have responsible oversight of these. And, you want to make sure that the money doesn't go to the loudest voices in the room, that it gets to some folks who just simply need the money in this horrible times here.
Yeah, and to Joni and Brian, just to piggyback on y'all's point, I just say, as somebody who is obviously a member of the Black community here, and has been privy to many sort of off the record conversations and back and forth, I really am concerned that this doesn't that this doesn't contribute to sort of a fracturing of community, if you will. I mean, there's obviously the Black community is decreased in this city, and you're hopeful that there can be some sort of unifying force or unifying presence, and that there is more of a harmonious process, if you will, around this.
Right. And does it get politicized next year when people are running for election, et cetera, because the mayor's term is up? That's something else to consider too.
Yeah.
There we go.
Let's pause on the city budget and policing. In sort of a related issue, there's been an alarming rise in reported hate crimes. We're going to discuss that. We're also going to check in on that pandemic thing that you may have heard about. Yeah. And there's a new app that you're being asked to download in Washington State. And of course, we got a whole bunch of decisions to be made to be made about who's going to get this coming vaccine. So we got lots more to talk about with Marcus Harrison Green and Joni Balter and Brian Callanan. All reasons to stay tuned for more Week in Review.
Those PPP loans that helped so many small businesses make it this far in this pandemic, key feature is that they are forgivable.
We're clicking along. We've forgiven about half of the loans that we've made.
I'm Kai Rizdal with more PPP loans may be on the way. What forgiveness looks like for one bank and the businesses it helped. That's next time on Marketplace at 2:30 and 6:30 p.m. on KUOW 94.9 and KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from PremiumCBD.com, a database of CBD brands that test for potency, pesticides, and heavy metals, helping consumers make informed CBD choices. Learn more at PremiumCBD.com.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:26, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
You're listening to the founder of the South Seattle Emerald and Seattle Times contributor, Marcus Harrison Green, Seattle Channel host and producer, Brian Callanan, and the host of the Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail, Joni Balter. And we're walking through the week gone by here on the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Reports of hate crimes are way up in King County. County prosecutors have received 51 cases this year compared to 30 in 2018 and 38 last year. Nationwide, the FBI says hate crimes are at their highest level in more than a decade. Marcus, you wrote a piece this week in the Seattle Times with the headline, "I fear everyday encounters more than I do hate groups." Would you tell us why you say that?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons is that only 54% of people actually report hate crime. So it's most likely, even with this uptick in hate crimes, it's most likely that it underrepresents the actual hate crimes that are going on. It's also the case, right, that most of the times that you encounter a hate crime or experience a hate crime or a victim of a hate crime, it's not from somebody who's a card-carrying member of the Knights Templar of the United Brotherhood of Bigots. It's going to be somebody, an individual who has been radicalized, or an individual who has sort of been stewing or marinating in hatred. You look at situations like Dylan Roof, the domestic terrorist who killed 9 parishioners in South Carolina so tragically. He wasn't technically a member of any official group. He was, somebody who had been radicalized and was acting, animated by these hated forces. The same with the domestic terrorist in El Paso, who ended up killing, 24 Latinx folks. And so you see these different things that continue to happen, and it's like, this is something that you can't necessarily legislate away or make a policy against hate or bias. You can certainly criminalize it after the fact, But at the end of the day, right, you can't monitor everybody 24/7. And as my piece that I think showed, it was, I opened up with a situation where I was at a library with a photographer from the Seattle Times. It was a children's, let me emphasize that, story time. And you had white supremacists there with weapons and full arsenal, and guns. And I mean, that still sticks out to me as, what if, something just triggers them off, or they become unhinged. And one person actually had been unhinged there. One of the white supremacists, I should say, had been unhinged there, and he decides to start shooting, right? I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of children for what, right? For this hateful ideology. And so, I will tell you, I mean, this isn't something that's hyperbolic either. The Department of Homeland Security came out, I want to say last month, in a report that was actually delayed by the Trump administration, but that's another story, that essentially said that white domestic terrorism is the #1 threat to domestic security. So these are things that we need to very much, be taking seriously and pay attention to.
Yeah, I want to hear from other panelists, but Marcus, you wrote and you said that this, I read this essay, and it was not just about, it was about you, it was about us. You addressed your readers directly.
Oh, you're the one that read the essay. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know what you want, and this is kind of a thorny, sort of annoying question sometimes, I realize, but you seem to be getting at wanting a change. I think the last word is it was you or something. Are you interested in change? What do you want to say to your readers and your listeners?
Well, yeah, I mean, I will say that at the end of the day, this is something, I mean, we talk so often, and rightfully so, right? That, what are our policymakers going to do about this and that? This is an issue that is societal. This is an issue that requires improvement of our society, of our communities, of us as individuals. This isn't something that, again, can be legislated away. And so in talking to Lonnie Lusardo, he's a gentleman who was actually a victim of a hate crime, and somebody who I quoted in my article, who also heads up a diversity and equity work for the Diversity Collaborative. It's like he said, I mean, we need to do sort of a self-audit and self-assessment. One of those things is, okay, who are in our social circles and who is not in our social circles, and why are those people not, right? Number two is, what is the media diet that we consume? Is it only from, I love you, Bill, but is it only from KUOW? Is it from elsewhere? Is it from other places? Is it a steady stream of information that looks a lot like, more like the diversity we see in our country, or is it not? And then the third is like, who are we voting for? And are those people who are sort of throwing gasoline on this violence? Are there people who are talking about more moderation and more civility? I'll tell you, I talked to several former white supremacists for this article who they didn't end up being quoted, but I mean, they said it themselves, that ultimately the things that led them out of hatred was the fact that they had connections with people who were different from them, and people who they once hated, and they just realized that, oh, they're people with the same issues and problems that I have, and all those issues about the reasons that I joined this white supremacist group, the lack of belonging, the lack of purpose, and the lack of being able to find people to blame for my own issues. Like, I don't have that anymore because I have strong connections.
Well, Marcus, wanted to compliment you on, the column, but
Here.
Wonderful phrase, woke tropolis.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I think that we all have to start first with hate rhetoric. There's been way too much the last 4 years, hate and high octane speech, in everything, and starting from the top with our president. I mean, I don't know about you, but I absolutely dream of being bored by the speeches of the next president.
Maybe we'll get some complete sentences. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want somebody ordinary. I want them boring. That just 3 cheers for boring is all I can say. You cannot underestimate how corrosive that endless, rude and crude speech is on society. So it's kind of like everyone just It's okay, let your worst impulses hang out. If you're going to do it, why can't I? So I think that is one of the sort of origin points of this.
Yeah.
I think it's also sort of heavily related to COVID in a weird way, just that you're trapped inside your house. You're not able to kind of go hang out, go drinking, go do the normal things that you've been able to do. And so for some, kind of weird reason, it's bringing out the worst in some people. Not everybody can handle this many months of this much sort of being stuck in your house.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, Marcus, I was really glad to see that article and the work that you did do to reach out to different people, white supremacists included, and including hearing you about that today. As a younger journalist a few years ago, I worked in Spokane. I remember very clearly one of the most vivid memories I have of my 4-year stint there was going out to the Aryan Nations compound in North Idaho. One of the scariest days I've ever had in my life. But I think it illustrates what you were talking about. It was a very enclosed area. These people didn't leave this compound. It was all surrounded by voices that they knew and the voices that they heard all the time. And when you're not able to see that or recognize that happening in our society, I think some people might look at these numbers like, oh, that's somewhere else. It's here.
Right.
It's now. And we have to be real about that, and we have to reckon with it. So I think it's really important that you put that together. And it's important to recognize that there are many different pieces here we have to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Finally, since we brought up, we were talking about Obama earlier, we've brought up Trump and Biden. I want to end by asking you, Marcus, if you have, how significant or not significant to you is the coming, election certification and inauguration and whatever comes next with Biden-Harris?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important to note that just because Biden will, be inaugurated on January 20th, hate isn't going away anytime soon. And I am fearful somewhat that it may just, especially, the rhetoric continuing to come from our current president, that, he might exacerbate, some of these yahoos and folks who have taken this hateful rhetoric to heart and could potentially commit to some violence. I would love to see our current president denounce all violence, whatsoever, but his track record doesn't say that he will. So.
Well, hate isn't going away, but you think about these different groups that the president tried to isolate as time went on, even with coronavirus, or especially with coronavirus. All but blaming Asian Americans by continually trying, oh, it's the China virus, as if that was going to remove the blame from him for his awful handling of this. I mean, he kept trying to slice it and trying to alienate different subgroups. And I do think that a new president sets a different tone.
Yeah, and hopefully recognizes the different people out there who are working to solve this crisis too, because that's a super important point that both of you make, because I think as we grow into this new year here, I don't think Trump's going anywhere. As we've all heard, he's talking about running again, possibly, or whatever else. I think the timing of those different announcements or whatever else is something we all have to pay close attention to.
Brian Callanan is Seattle Channel host and producer. We're with Joni Balter from Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail, and from the South Seattle Emerald and the Seattle Times, Marcus Harrison Green. And we're talking about what happened this week and what it means to us personally, and what it could mean to all of us. And we're going to return with an update on that pandemic. And there's an app for that, and there's a vaccine for that, but it's not simple. Stay tuned.
Support for KUOW comes from Washington Trust Bank in the Northwest and now in Smoky Point. Independent, privately owned, and committed to serving their clients since 1902. Now at the Marketplace off I-5, exit 206. Member FDIC.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. 49 degrees in Seattle, partly sunny. Overnight, we're expecting a clear sky with a low in the upper 30s. Tomorrow, sunny with a high of 52. It's 12:38, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke. I've gotten so used to being able to see my my panelist of journalists here on Week in Review. I forget that maybe you don't know about that. We're on Facebook and YouTube, and you can find us by searching KUOW Public Radio. I know we've all had enough Zooms, but it's become one of my favorite visual connections of the week that I get to be able to see you all and interact with you. So come join us if you like. We're talking about the week gone by here, and I want to get at this, the latest in the pandemic. A couple of things. The Governor Inslee, this week asked you to use this new free phone app that alerts you if you're exposed to someone who tested positive for coronavirus. The app is called KUOW Notify, as in Washington. And the way it works is anybody who tests positive is supposed to enter that information into their phone. Your phone automatically exchanges random, anonymous, ever-changing codes with other phones over Bluetooth and tells you if you've come near a possible transmitter, and then you quarantine yourself. Governor Inslee said this is not a government plot to surveil you.
First off, this system does not store any personal information. Second, it does not share any personal information. Third, it does not track your location, doesn't know where you are, won't store that information. It does not track which KUOW Notify users are notified if you test positive. Last, it doesn't provide any personal information to developers or to the Department of Health.
I've got the app. I check on it every once in a while. There's a bunch of numbers, and the one that matters to me the most is the number 0 so far, of what they call like a match key count or something like that. Anybody else have this app on their phone? Are you actually using this thing?
I turned the app on right away, just thinking, okay, what harm can come of it? Just because that seems like really valuable information to have. And I hear the governor there trying to say, don't worry, we're not going to report your location, as if anybody's able to go anywhere anyway. That's funny. But, I think that whatever worries we have about that the government is sort of trying to get information on us has to be somewhat matched, if not overwhelmed, by the fact that this is public health information that we can each benefit from. And if you can benefit from it in a situation like this, it probably balances out as a favorable for something to use.
It's one of those situations, though, and we saw the pushback there from Representative Walsh, the Republican out of Aberdeen, on this one, really concerned about the privacy side of it. So I hear exactly what you're saying, Joni, there, and I haven't gotten on my phone just yet. I'm getting there. But it's one of those situations where I think people start to worry about privacy, and they also worry how efficacious this could be. If not everybody's got it, then are we really going to have a good grasp on what we have? I guess my thoughts on this are very much in sync with what you're saying there, Joni, in that I just want to know, and I want to get that information out there. And if other people aren't necessarily doing it, I mean, and they're worried about privacy, guess what? That cell phone that you're walking around with in your pocket, don't even try to pretend that isn't tracking you in different ways right now as we speak. So I think that's one piece of it for me. And then just in terms of the efficacy of it, I really believe that even if you're able to break down one chain, let's say, one chain of transmission of the disease or whatever else, then you've done something. Maybe you have saved a life there. So I know it's a difficult issue for a lot of people, but I really see that public health benefit too.
Darn you, Joni and Brian, you've made me feel irresponsible for not having downloaded this app. I'm going to download it after the show. I will say,
make it happen. It's mainly Bill's fault, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess my take was I was, I'm sort of hermetically sealed in my home, so I don't go out anyway. But I was just sort of worried about maybe more the psychological effects of maybe this giving folks a false notion that, oh, I didn't, get a notification, so I can kind of go out and do whatever I want and continue to be irresponsible. But, to your point, right, if it stops just, one strand or one potential interaction, then it's worth it. So.
Yeah. Well, I did see some colleagues on Slack saying, somebody said, I just downloaded it and I'm scared. And somebody said, me too. And I was a little surprised. I didn't ask them about it because I thought, well, that seems kind of personal, but I wasn't sure why people would feel nervous to know about an exposure instead of not know about an exposure.
Well, I think it goes to the lessons that we have learned in just regular use of our phones and social media. And that's saying, if you're not paying for it, you're not the customer, you're the product being sold. So we've all been told to stand up and be alert about the fact that every time you give information or you sign into something, you're sort of making yourself vulnerable. And look, privacy is really important. But as I said, sort of at the beginning of it, privacy is important, but this public health crisis sort of lends itself to a judgment that it makes more sense to be able to know, are you transmitting the disease to someone else? Were you exposed? Do you have certain steps you should take?
And I just, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Bill.
Well, just I wanted to make sure we have time to discuss the bigger story, which is the ongoing rollout of a vaccine against this. Speaking of, will people use it, right? Will people take it? There are also ethical questions about who should get the vaccine first. I asked the King County Executive, Dow Constantine, about that this week. Who gets it?
One place in particular we're targeting is to make sure, beyond the healthcare workers, to make sure that in communities that have been historically left out, including left out in formalized healthcare, that we are working with community-based organizations to reach Black, Indigenous, people of color communities that have not always been accorded equal treatment.
Marcus, any reaction to that? Do you trust that's going to happen, to be effective, be fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the logistics of it, right? And it also comes down to the fact, right, that there has been a long history of mistrust between a lot of folks from BIPOC communities and medical institutions. You can go back to the Tuskegee experiment, for those who don't know, which essentially shoot, it's too much to get into, but I will say that, so you're attempting to make up for decades and decades of mistrust in a very, condensed time frame and period in terms of getting the vaccine. I mean, I know it's anecdotal, but even just interviewing folks in South King County about whether they wanted to get the vaccine or not, there are so many people who are like, I don't know. I don't trust the vaccine. There still is a lot of misinformation around it. There are still literally people who think that there's some microchip or something that Bill Gates will be able to control them. There's other people thinking this is also, going to set up something from, the Will Smith movie of I Am Legend, where people become zombies. And it's like, how in the world do you fight that level of misinformation, somewhat, and, as sort of irrational as it can be. And so, I do think it's going to take community leadership to step in and, somebody to say, hey, I've taken the vaccine. It's safe. It's okay. And I think you should too.
Even beyond conspiracy theories, the fact that it's being rushed for obvious reasons, that it's an emergency approval. I mean, if you figure, well, it's a good thing there's a lot of safety steps built into FDA. You find out that stuff's not happening, even though you understand why. If you don't have all the details, it's understandable to say, oh, so you want to give it to me first.
When we don't even know the durability around it, right? I mean, a flu vaccine, we got to take one every year. Is this going to be the case where it's every 3 months? Is it every, and we don't know if you'll still, even if you take it, can you still potentially, right, infect or transfer, COVID to somebody else? So again, there's a lot of unknowns here.
Right. And some of these vaccines, it takes a double shot, right? You get that first one and then there's got to be a follow-up down the line. So I think there's a few different questions here. I will say, though, from our state's perspective, they're working on developing a plan. They put it out in October, at least the preliminary version of it. They're going to be forwarding that on to the CDC today. So I think what we're seeing is different states like ours trying to work this out as they go, because there's been an absence of really solid national policy on where to go here. States have had to figure out a lot of this on their own, kind of building the plane at 30,000 feet, right? So I think when we put out these different things like apps or whatever else, that might be in some cases a situation where people say, I don't trust the government on this one or everywhere else. But I think bottom line, that's really what the state's trying to build up here. Some trust in a system here that's going to help people out and hopefully use a good equity lens so that the people who really need the help first and need the help most urgently and have been cut out of this in the past, including people of color, that they're getting the vaccine as quickly as possible.
By the way, I want to make it clear that I'm going to be taking this vaccine. When I understand someone's concern about being the first to have it tried out on them, I'm going to be standing in line. Although I don't know if you saw the New York Times did the visual. Did anyone see that? Where do you stand in line? Mm-hmm. And truly, you have to scroll past healthcare workers and first responders mm-hmm. and the elderly and the sick and all, again, for good reason. But right. There's a little figure that represents me because of what I entered in, the fact that I'm working from home, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I'm way at the tail end of the line. But one thing I saw, one idea was to give it that maybe if you're just following the science, maybe the vaccine should be given to the people who are most likely to be spreading it, to be super spreaders. And I wondered about there's going to be an ethical, pushback about that.
Oh, you mean people who kind of refused to wear masks and
rewarding the bad behavior, right? Yeah.
Well, it could be bad behavior, but it could also be
bad behavior, as you know.
I've got to go to work. I don't have the ability to stay home. A range of situations like that to people who are having, giant weddings. I don't know how that works, that you're self-reporting that you're a super spreader, but.
And then they'll say, okay, let's hurry up and give you the vaccine. Probably not. This is the public health ethicist decision or set of decisions, probably of the centuries, something like that. This is a big deal. Some of the early takes on this, we don't have the exact stuff here yet, but some of the early takes that you're going to have certainly healthcare workers, first responders, essential workers. I mean, this makes sense, right? That these folks who put themselves out there every day to keep some of us, healthy, safe, and the rest of it should probably be first, or in the early groups, however you say that. I'm against, rewarding people who don't wear masks. I think that's probably not the right thing, but, it will come in an order. It'll come faster than we thought. So we should all be good about that. One thought I have about the 2 shots that you mentioned, Brian, I read somewhere that there are considerable side effects, that the shot makes you sick. I mean, and so I wonder how off-putting that is to some folks who say, I took the first one, I did not like it, but you have to go back for the second one or you just wasted precious medicine.
Well, Joni, I'm sure like Elizabeth Holmes or something will come up with a new idea that you don't have to take shots. It'll
magically go away. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're onto something there, Joni, when it comes to those different shots and people. Again, it goes back to this whole idea of trying to trust the government, what they're doing here with this health response. And I'm really hopeful that the state of Washington, even though we do need to move quickly here, they do take some time to figure out a good plan so it is as equitable as possible.
Right.
Okay, what if we use the time we have left to get into what's making us smile?
There we go.
And by the way, we do this every week. We end this way, and we are also ending the year here. So I want to turn to the listener for a moment and say, for our end of the year show, what is making you smile? Leave us a voicemail letting us know, because we've been here. I asked politicians this. I asked my Week in Review guests this. I'd like to hear from just a bunch of listeners letting us know, even in 2020, what is it that has made you smile and is making you smile? So here's the voicemail number for that: 206-221-3663. Again, that's 206-221-3663. So, and we are going to do this show. You can join me and some guests for a live year in review on Thursday, December 17th, and we'll put it up on YouTube, and you can find out more about that. It's a free event. You can RSVP. Go to KUOW.org/events. Okay, so I'm done with that section of, and now I just I'll start with something that made me smile this week. The Seattle Sounders this week beat Dallas in a crushing blowout, 1-0. And that means that the Sounders will play in the finals on Monday night here in Seattle against, does anyone know who?
Was it Kansas? Who got through there? Was it KC that got through?
The
Who?
Loons. They're welcoming us back.
Yes, the Loons. It's the Loons. Welcome to Minnesota. That's the state bird of Minnesota. The Minnesota Loons are welcoming us back. We beat them last year in a crushing blowout, 1-0. And so we will meet again, Loons. And I've never been to a Loons game, so I assume that some Minnesota fans will come to the match in Seattle and they'll be there doing their special team chant. I hope they'll be doing that. But this year, that chant will be less effective. Yeah, not as effective because the CenturyLink Field just changed its name. And does anyone know the new name of the field?
Lumen.
The Lumen, right?
Field, which is going to be confusing. Are those fans doing the call of the Minnesota Loon, or are they saying Lumen? So I think this is going to have the effect of neutralizing the Minnesota fans and thus ensuring that the Sounders will win on Monday in a crushing blowout of 1-0. Okay.
I'm sorry, Bill. You said less effective. Could there be any less effective chant at all? I mean,
I think we just record Bill doing that and just pump it into the stadium. That'll get him every time.
What makes you all smile?
I'll throw one out there. Other than finally realizing what the Katharine Hepburn connection was to the Western Soccer Finals there, I'm really happy about something that I was working on with Seattle Channel over the past couple of weeks here. Thank you for the Loons in the background. It's in regard to the figgy pudding, the Great Figgy Pudding, the caroling competition that they do every year in downtown. They've got to go virtual with it this year, but they found a way to make it work with covered clear face masks. There's a lot of technical work that's going on in there such that they're able to put this event together. It's something that's really cool to see every year just because it's some great holiday music. There's some different cultural groups involved with it this year that have brought some new songs, which is really cool. I just was really gratified to see that one thing from the holidays that I really, really looked forward to every December kind of stick around, and most importantly, trying to support the Senior Center and Food Bank at Pike Market.
I'm not able to go inside, so please bring us the figgy pudding.
Bring it right here. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying.
Back away from the figgy pudding.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I will say, Brian, Joni, Bill, me, oh my, I rarely ever use this word, but I am stoked because Warner Brothers yesterday announced that their entire slate, their entire movie releases for 2021 will all be available on HBO Max for the viewing pleasure from the comfort of your own home and your couch. I was not planning to leave my home, through COVID. I might not ever leave my home now at this point. So, everything from The Matrix to Dune to oh my goodness, Festivus has come early this year, and I'm so proud. So yeah.
Movie theater owners are weeping, but
Yes.
Many of the rest of us are stoked, as Mark says. Yes, home viewing. What about you, Joni?
Well, I love that you do this at the end of the show because I think, look, as dark and dreary as this December is, it gives people something to smile about. And mine is, that the vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel, that we finally know that some hope is coming. I mean, it's real. And so for me, I'm looking for comparisons in history. So I'm all about a renewed Roaring 20s. The earlier one, that one a little while ago, followed a war, an economic downturn, but also a pandemic. So maybe it's coming.
So we just need to dance the Charleston. We need some flapping.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Maybe a little bit of loon in there. I don't know. That's a whole new dance for you, Bill. That's pretty awesome.
I can clap like a loon if I'm asked.
Right.
I'm just waiting to be invited.
So Joni, call me the Green Gatsby, Joni. Hopefully I can
There we go.
revive the Roaring 20s there.
I'd be okay with some Roaring 20s. We need something better than this dumpster fire of a year. That's for sure.
This is the week in review.
The loons.
Uh-huh.
They've come around to say goodbye.
And so must we. Yes, it is time to, it's a swan song, if you will, of Week in Review, because our time is up. I want to thank all my guests today. the founder of the South Seattle Emerald, and Seattle Times columnist Marcus Harrison Green. Marcus, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Joni Balter hosts Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail. Joni, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And Brian Callanan, it was a pleasure to have you on today, a host and producer on the Seattle channel. Thanks for doing the show.
Great to be here, Bill. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for watching us. If you watched us online, that was thanks to Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. Make that happen on Facebook and YouTube. The producer of the show is Sarah Leibovitz. I'm Bill Radke. Go Sounders. Lumen!